Can you imagine the world of Final Fantasy VI with no ethers? It seems like a weird question, right? I mean, of course, ethers are in every mainline Final Fantasy game, and in most other RPGs in some form or fashion. They're found in chests stolen from enemies, purchased in shops, and are, in general, widely available. Well, of course, Lenard, how are you going to restore your MP? You know, the magic points that you exhaust whenever you cast magic spells? Well, that itself presents a problem. You see, before we go further, I think a few questions need to be posed when thinking about the fact that ethers even exist after the War of the Magi. According to the lore of the game, wasn't magic supposed to be eradicated altogether? And if ethers are a remnant of the War of the Magi from over 1,000 years ago, what's the shelf life of these ethers, and why specifically are they still available to purchase from various shops around the entire world being more than 1,000 years old? Get ready for this one, fellow returners. I might have uncovered an unspoken war in Final Fantasy VI between Figaro Castle and Thamasa against South Figaro and Nicaea, or as I'll affectionately call it, the War on Ethers. And listen, whether this is your first video with us or not, welcome to the Returner's Hideout, where we take deep dives into the Final Fantasy series each and every week. And if you're not a returner yet and want to be part of the fun, it costs literally nothing and there's no application to fill out. How easy is that? Alright, so let me explain a little bit here first for the uninitiated. As far as game mechanics go, when you use a magic spell in the Final Fantasy series, it costs magic points, or MP for short. You also gain magic points in battle later on when you're learning magic from espers, but that's a different type of magic point, apparently. So just like potions restoring your health when you're low on HP, which means hit points or even health points, ethers restore your MP when you're low on magic points. It's a basic system that's used in just about any RPG you could ever play, all the way back from the D&D days to the newest RPGs out today, although generally it's referred to now as mana. Alright, now that you understand the basic magic functions and how to restore it, now we can get into the heavy stuff. But I'll make it short and easy to digest. It's not that dramatic. My editor just likes to do that sometimes. He's right. According to the Final Fantasy VI fandom page, the War of the Magi was a war fought 1,000 years before the events of Final Fantasy VI. A cataclysmic event that nearly destroyed the world. It forced humanity back centuries. With the espers and Magi gone, magic faded from the world and into legends. So yes, magic isn't supposed to exist, at least not for common folk. The biggest exception you'll learn early on is Terra, the lead character in the beginning segments of the game. She's the product of an esper named Madawin and a human named Madeline, or in other versions Madonna. Espers are these magical beasts that give people the power of magic through the throes of death. You see, once an esper dies, it turns into magicite, a stone that can be equipped that teaches the characters in Final Fantasy VI magic spells at varying degrees of speed, all dependent upon earning magic points after battle. Having the best of both worlds running through Terra's veins, of course she has potential magical abilities, and at the tender age of 2, she was immediately captured from the esper world and raised into clutches of the Empire in the normal world. Again, normal people don't have magical abilities, as espers and humans fought, and espers were banished to the esper world I just mentioned. So why then do ethers restore MP when consumed, and more importantly, how or why do they exist in any capacity, being readily available for anyone to consume? There are some theories I've seen in various articles and places around the internet that ultimately conclude that ethers are just an enjoyable drink that just happens to heal MP when consumed. And to that I say no. I mean, okay, despite my urges to just completely dismiss this theory, let's take a look at it using real-world examples. So just as in real life, there are recipes for drinks that have changed slightly over the last 100 years that just so happens to be good for other things. Take Coca-Cola, for example. You can do different things with it, like dunking your rusty wrenches into it in order to get them sparkling again. Or you can also, I don't know, ruin your teeth. It's still delicious. I mean, there are several videos on YouTube about using this drink for all kinds of practical purposes, and you can also just chill it in your fridge and drink it. But in this world, the Final Fantasy VI world, every item has a function. It's not like you can use an echo screen and then just so happen to gain the power to become a wolf or run at ultra fast speeds. It doesn't work like that. If you use an echo screen, it very specifically heals the character of the mute status effect, which prevents characters from casting magic spells. Nothing else. So I don't buy that theory. That sounds like such a cop-out answer that really doesn't solve anything. So of course I had to dive in and do some research, but maybe I'm off the mark here. What do you think about the idea that ethers are just a random drink being sold that also restore MP when consumed? According to some mythology and even some ancient science, ether was essentially the material that filled the region of the universe above the terrestrial sphere and was supposed to be the breath of the gods, which ultimately formed the air that mortal beings breathe currently. So you can't really take an empty bottle and swing it at the air and have ether inside of it. Link, I'm looking at you. It's a celestial thing. So with that bit of information, it's clear that ether isn't really brewed like a potion, or this here green tea. It's something that comes from a place of mystic origins. Is that why it's so expensive in every Final Fantasy game? So tell me again, how is this drink just floating around? And it just so happens to restore MP also. Now with everything I talked about so far, I really don't buy that theory. It's interesting to note something about ethers in Final Fantasy VI, and bear with me just for the next few sentences. This next bit of info is actually found from the fandom site. Ethers are not available for purchase until Albrook and beyond. I mean, yes, they're found in treasure chests and dropped or stolen from certain enemies, but you can't buy one until you reach Albrook. And Albrook is right here, which if you look just to the east, there's the Cave of the Sealed Gate, and that's where the Esper World is. That's very interesting indeed that the first buyable ethers are next to the Esper World. Except, that's not true at all, Final Fantasy VI fandom site. You need to recheck your facts, sir. You can buy them way before Albrook in the Figaro Castle shop mere minutes into the game. That's the earliest I could find it anyway. My guess is, clearly these items are a remnant of a different time, and just how like the real world Coke I mentioned before is still available in shops despite being created nearly a century and a half ago, ethers are too. So maybe to a small extent, the people in the forums were just a little right. Just a little. I mean, really. What purpose would ethers have in a world where magic has completely disappeared? Well, dearest returner, we learn a little bit later on that magic has not completely disappeared. And I think this is why ethers are still around. For this bit of the theory, we journey to the east of the world map to a little town called Thamasa. Thamasa in Final Fantasy VI represents a shift in the game. It's from this point on that you realize the world is in a direct path of a huge amount of change. And that's exactly what happens. And I'll take a second just to say that potential spoilers will be discussed in a bit, but it's important to this theory. So if you haven't played Final Fantasy VI past the halfway point, please do yourself a favor and go ahead and do that, and then come back to this video. Alright, let's get into it. Inside the town of Thamasa, there are people that live there that are holding on to a gigantic secret. They don't dare speak of the secret until one of their own, a 10-year-old girl named Realm, gets caught in a house fire, and now they all of a sudden use ice spells to attempt to put it out, even though they all know it's wrong. There's even shouts from the town's citizens that they really shouldn't be using any spells. But my question regarding this is, exactly how does a secret this big keep from getting out over 1,000 years? Or perhaps the better question is, how are they even able to use magic in any capacity? It seemed like after some persuasion from the village elder, everyone in town just hopped right in there and started casting spells when previously they spoke of magic like it was an ancient thing that no one dares speak of. To answer that question, the Super Nintendo version of the game explains that ancient mage warriors fled to Thamasa a long time ago and used magicite to learn magic after being hunted by normal people for being able to use that magic. They were blamed for the entire War of the Magi. So essentially, other kingdoms, such as Figaro and Albrook, knew of the existence of these descendants of mage warriors and probably kept ethers around in the event that they needed them for any reason, essentially showing some sort of solidarity among the people in the mage descendants. To balance this, there are a handful of places in the world of balance that simply won't sell them, and I'm wondering, historically, if these are the places that opposed mage warriors to begin with. South Figaro and Nicaea are two of the places that don't sell them in the world of balance, but do end up selling them in the world of ruin, I think, at that point because the world has ended, and differences are put aside in order for everyone to unite against the opposition, in this case Kefka, and the fact that it's stated through dialogue that magic is going to be the key to winning this war, something Bannon said way back in the first couple of hours of gameplay at the Returner's Hideout. That's us. To go further with this theory, I thought maybe that's why there's a Figaro Castle and then a South Figaro separately, potentially separate factions. They couldn't agree on whether they should be supporting magic users or not, so they separated into different regions made up of different people. And to support this idea, there is a ship that runs specifically from Nicaea to South Figaro, so there's that. This is all kind of reminiscent of the Berlin Wall between West Berlin and East Germany, something that started because of socio-economic principles that stemmed from the Cold War, essentially separating East and West. Now, I'm certainly not really comparing something like the Cold War to something as trivial as ethers in a fictional world, but those mage warriors, to certain people, definitely symbolize something that they thought would bring on the end of the world. I mean, they were responsible for the War of the Magi after all, based on their hypothesis. I mean, I guess there was a war going on in the game separately from this ether thing, but on the world map, when looking at the locations of South Figaro and Nicaea, there is a sort of barrier between them and everyone else. It's interesting to to note too that there's not any one single character or NPC in the game that speaks of which places oppose the magic users. And the lack of ethers being sold in these two specific shops is never really talked about either. So in essence, the rest of the world was in support of these mage warriors, with South Figaro and Nicaea being places that held their own in terms of being on the side against espers and anything to do with magic, due to the idea that the world could end or another war could be started if the mage warriors continued to inhabit other parts of the world. So the warriors fled to a specific remote location where they wouldn't be bothered. Another interesting note is that South Figaro, one of the two towns against the whole magic thing, is home to Bannon, the person I mentioned earlier that claimed magic was the key to winning the war. Note that while he is from South Figaro, according to the Ultimania book, he doesn't live there. He had to create his own small faction in a cave past Mount Colts. But I think it's very important to note that this is all speculation, of course. And actually, I've got another theory right here that explains why Bannon left the area, and it has nothing to do with ethers and everything to do about him leading a double life. Go ahead and click here to check that out.